Welcome to Blue Talks.
I'd like to tell you about my friend Sharon. Sharon is head of revenue cycle at a mid-size health facility, and she's brilliant. This woman can make those numbers dance and sing and do the cha-cha, and she does her job better than anybody I've ever known. But despite all of her brilliance, Sharon cannot seem to get a hold of using empathy to connect with her people. You know, it's kind of funny too, because she was so frustrated, and she's done all of this stuff. She had a coach, she did the personality tests, she jokes that she's been to HR so often that she should have frequent flyer miles. But she still can't seem to make this work. And when I went and talked to her people, they felt the same way. I was actually shocked to find out that they call her the T-Rex. And when I asked why, she said, you know how T-Rex had those tiny little ear holes and would stomp around and like bite people's heads off? That's Sharon. Doesn't hear what you said, stomps around and bites your head off for nothing. Vivid, but that's how they felt about her. And it was too bad, because since she couldn't connect with her people through empathy, their innovation was down, their productivity and employee satisfaction isn't what it could have been, and profit was not what it should have been. And unfortunately, no matter how brilliant Sharon was, they ended up demoting her. And she left her position sad and confused and demoralized. If your emotional abilities are not in hand, if you don't have self-awareness, if you can't handle your distressing emotions, if you don't have empathy to create effective relationships, then no matter how smart you are, you're not going to get very far. That quote comes from Daniel Goleman in his book, Emotional Intelligence and Why It Can Be More Important Than IQ, published in 1995. We've been talking about this for 30 years, and there's still a disconnect between what empathy can do for people in organizations. Empathy is not a nice to have. It's needed in business now more than ever. But how do we do that? The Big Four global consultancy, Ernst & Young, did not one, but two landmark studies on empathy in organizations in the last 5 years alone. Major authors like Brené Brown and Simon Sinek talk about empathy in their books all the time. And it seems a week doesn't go by that we don't see an article in the Harvard Business Review, in the Wall Street Journal, in Forbes, in Inc., Fast Company. We're all talking about it. There's a definite disconnect when it comes to our organizations, though. And my research says it's because of two reasons. The first is that we haven't agreed on a definition of empathy. If you ask someone what empathy is, generally their response is going to be, it means I feel what you feel. And that's one, but there's 43 different kinds of empathy that fall into 8 broad categories. The I feel what you feel is one, but it's only one. The second is that people fail to realize that empathy can be a skill-based, learnable, teachable thing. We have this myth that empathy is one of those things that either you're born with or you're not. And when we're talking about affective or emotional empathy, the I feel what you feel, that's kind of true. But there's 42 others. And these have a place in our organizations. Just because empathy is seen as a soft skill doesn't mean it doesn't have a hard impact, especially in terms of innovation, of productivity, and profit. I want to tell you about one of my clients, Dave. Dave took an interim position for a medium-sized health system, and they brought him in to be a director specifically to be able to connect with people for strategy and culture. Now, as we all know, Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we knew we were going to have to start with the culture before we could even begin to get to the strategy. So we did. The best way to approach culture, we thought, was going to be to connect with the people. And that meant, in this case, hitting the ground running and making contact with his people as much as possible right away. We decided we wanted to develop his know, like, and trust factor. And what that meant for us is I wanted him in contact with his people every single day. I did not want him to take 3-hour lunches. Dave's a busy guy. He doesn't have time to do tea parties with his employees. But he did have time to at least see them and to be seen. Hey, how you doing? I saw that your kid did the Little League thing on Facebook. That's cool. How's your mom? I know you were gone last week. By making his people feel seen and heard, Dave began to be known. The more they began to know Dave, the more they began to like Dave. And I don't mean that they were besties forever, but I mean they built a rapport as employees, as people, based on respect. And because they could see that what he did was walk the talk, so that his words and actions aligned, they eventually began to trust him. Trust is built when words and actions align over time. And that's precisely what Dave did with his people, one person at a time. Right away, he had someone come to him with ideas to raise efficiency, to help with productivity in the first 30 days. Now, I know that that sounds unbelievable, just because in that first 30 days, that's not possible, but it was, because the people that are boots on the ground and in the trenches already had the solutions. They're hands-on every single day. It just took someone that they trusted enough to be able to come to with innovative ideas. When Dave started listening to those innovative ideas, their productivity got better. Not only because the inefficiencies were stamped out, but also because they felt heard. They weren't a cog in the machine. They were part of the organization. They weren't orphaned anymore. And their employee satisfaction scores went from the mid-40s to the mid-90s in 90 days. Naturally, profit followed. Dave was able to increase the revenue in his department by $600,000 on average in those 3 months. And because his employees brought to him the innovative idea to add 2 service lines, he was able to add a program where he's going to be able to add $14 million every year, year upon year. All because he built his know, like, and trust factor to be able to increase innovation, productivity, and profit. So where's Dave now? Dave was in the situation where his superiors didn't believe he could do this again. So they hired him on for another 90 days. They wanted to see if he could replicate what he had done before. And they made him an advisor and strategist consultant to the C-suite. And he did. Now, Dave has his own C-suite position. And he managed to do this in 1 year because he built his know, like, and trust factor to raise innovation, raise productivity, and raise profit. Let's go back to those Ernst & Young studies. The first one happened in 2023 to look at the Great Resignation and see what the result was on the workforce. And they studied leaders, they studied employees, they studied organizations. And what they found was that the organizations who were able to use empathy actively within those organizations were able to raise innovation by 86%, productivity by 87% and profit by 81%. Empathy is a soft skill with a hard impact on the bottom line. The second study came a year and a half later, and they looked at the companies who had started to talk about empathy, started trying to instill empathy. But what they found was when they had leaders that talked the empathy talk, but didn't walk the empathy walk, they lost the trust of their employees, to the extent that 52% of employees would rather go to a different job than work with leaders that they didn't trust. Empathy is about connection, not feeling. You connect with your people when they know you, they like you, they trust you. Then it impacts your bottom line. I want to end this by talking about 3 ways that you can start to supercharge your leadership through a better use of empathy today. The first is by utilizing connection. Empathy is not about feeling, it's about connection and understanding. And that doesn't have to be heart to heart. You can build connection within an organization. You can build connections logically and cognitively. You can build connections societally. It's those connections that allow the innovation, productivity, and profit to happen. Second, remembering that leadership is an action, not a position. That was said by Don Gannon, the president of Westinghouse in the 1960s, and it holds as true today as it did then. Leadership is not a power suit, a pay range, a corner office, or a title. Leadership is what you do. I would add to that by saying empathy is not a feeling, it's an action. It's wonderful to have it, but how are you going to use it? The third is by remembering that empathy is skill-based. You can teach it, you can learn it, and you have to practice it. For those that have been in a business program, you didn't go in knowing statistics, knowing accounting, knowing human capital management. You had to learn these skills and then you had to practice them, because practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And you can ingrain the bad skills and the bad habits just as quickly as the good ones. So as you're working on these skills, remember that the best and the brightest, the best athletes, the best musicians, Patrick Mahomes, Yo-Yo Ma, Michael Jordan, they were talented phenoms, but they practiced to become the best in their fields. And it took dedicated practice and probably coaching and a lot of self-reflection and understanding how they could continually do better, continuous improvement. So let me ask you, in the last week, can you think of an interaction you had with someone where you felt you were making a connection, where you were creating something with empathy? Now thinking of those 3 skills, right? Leadership in action, empathy is connection, and making it skill-based. Which of those 3 might have made it even better? And if you had it to do all over again tomorrow, what would you do differently? Thank you.